Night falls slowly over Hampton Court Palace, draping its red brick towers in a hushed, eerie stillness. Beneath the glow of the last amber light, ivy clings to stone, and the River Thames flows dark and slow beyond the walls. The palace gates stand closed now, the tourists long gone. Yet within, in corridors lit only by emergency bulbs and shadow, something remains awake. Wind curls through the cloisters like a whispered warning. The echo of unseen footsteps taps along the marble floors, fading before the source can be seen. Up above, high on a time-worn balcony, a figure might be watching. You do not see them, but they are there. Hampton Court is a place where royalty once danced, ruled, and died. From the lavish chambers of Henry VIII to the quiet rooms where queens waited to hear their fate, every stone carries weight. And some who lived here never left. Some linger in the walls, in the locked galleries, in the quiet hours when no one should be moving. Over the centuries, visitors have reported ghostly screams, sudden chills, and the unnerving sensation of being watched. Staff have refused to enter certain wings after dark. Thermal cameras have captured heat signatures that vanish on approach. No room is truly empty here. Some simply host the dead. This documentary uncovers the truth behind three of Hampton Court's most persistent specters, royal souls that never laid down their crowns, a queen who still cries out for mercy, a king who stands guard in death as he once did in life, a lady betrayed by loyalty and lost in madness. These are not legends told for effect. These are accounts pulled from archives, recordings, and the trembling voices of those who have seen what should not be seen. Hampton Court Palace began as a symbol of power. Built in 1515 by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, it was soon seized by Henry VIII, who transformed it into the grandest royal residence in England. The red brick facade and ornate interiors were meant to project absolute authority, but beneath the polished floors and painted ceilings, a darker legacy grew. It was here that Henry VIII hosted lavish feasts while his wives waited in fear. Two of them, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, would be executed under his command. Their final days passed inside these very walls. Courtiers who served the wrong master vanished. Servants whispered of ghosts even in the Tudor era. The palace was not just a home, it was a stage for betrayal, punishment, and the slow unraveling of royal minds. The haunted gallery, now infamous for its cold spots and phantom screams, was once a thoroughfare between private apartments. It became a corridor of dread when Catherine Howard ran down it barefoot, screaming for Henry to spare her life. She was dragged away before she could reach him. She was beheaded days later. During the English Civil War, the palace became the property of Parliament. King Charles I, once ruler of the realm, was imprisoned before his execution. His ghost, some say, never truly left. The palace became a repository of grief, royal and common alike. Fires, illnesses, suicides, the walls soaked in stories. Visitors today often remark on the strange heaviness in the air, but history shows why. Over the centuries, dozens of deaths have occurred within the palace grounds. The formal gardens were once burial plots for plague victims. In sealed passages and blocked stairwells, remains have been discovered. No clear records exist for many of them. This is a place built for splendor, but carved by sorrow. Every arch, every corridor, every chamber has witnessed the downfall of men and women who once ruled with certainty. And as we delve deeper, it becomes clear. The dead here do not rest quietly. They persist, waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard. Richard Hale has worked as a night security guard at Hampton Court Palace for over 12 years. Tall, quiet, methodical, Richard is not a man easily rattled. He has seen power cuts, wild animals sneaking in through the gardens, and once even a group of trespassing teenagers who claimed they were ghost hunters. But nothing compares to what he experienced on a cold November night in 2019. It was just past 2 in the morning when he began his usual patrol through the Tudor apartments. The air had dropped unusually low for that time of year. As he entered the Queen's Gallery, a corridor infamous among staff, Richard noticed the silence. Not the typical quiet of an empty building, but an oppressive stillness, as if the hallway itself was holding its breath. Halfway through the gallery, the door behind him slammed shut with such force that the floor trembled. He turned sharply, his flashlight cutting across the paneled walls. No wind, no movement. The door had been propped open with a wedge. It was no longer there. Then came the sound. Heels, running, sharp, frantic, uneven. The echo of someone moving fast down the corridor, but nothing was in front of him. No shadows, no body. Just the noise, growing louder, closer, and then silence again. "I felt it move through me," Richard said, voice low. Like walking straight into sorrow. My chest tightened, and for a second I couldn't breathe. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Like a sadness too old to explain. When he checked the gallery's security footage later that night, the recording glitched precisely at the moment he heard the footsteps. A static blur moved across the frame. In a later frame, a faint white smudge appeared near the far end of the corridor, no defined shape, just motion, like someone turning a corner too quickly to see. Richard filed the report, as he always does. But since that night, he has refused to enter the Queen's Gallery alone. Even during daylight checks, he waits for a second guard. "There are places in this palace," he says, "that remember too much, and they don't forget who walks through." Her name was Catherine Howard. Once crowned Queen of England at just 17, she became the 5th wife of Henry VIII, and the second to meet a violent end. Unlike her cousin Anne Boleyn, who faced her execution with solemn resolve, Catherine is remembered not for how she died, but for how she begged to live. She had been young, vibrant, and ill-prepared for the deadly games of Tudor court politics. When accusations of infidelity reached the king's ears, they spread like fire. Catherine was seized and placed under house arrest within Hampton Court. One version of the story says she broke free from her guards one night, ran barefoot down the long gallery toward the chapel where Henry prayed, and screamed his name, pleading for mercy. She never made it. The guards dragged her back. Days later, she was executed at the Tower of London. Her final cries were lost to time, but perhaps not entirely. In the centuries since, visitors and staff alike have reported the sound of frantic footsteps echoing through the gallery she once ran. Screams pierced the silence in the early hours of the morning, followed by slamming doors and freezing cold air. Some say they see a white blur dart past the far end of the corridor. Others have described the presence of a young woman in a white gown, her face twisted in terror, her mouth open mid-scream. In 1999, a group of school children on a guided tour witnessed one such event. A girl in the back began to cry uncontrollably. When asked what was wrong, she said someone had grabbed her arm and whispered, "Please, tell him I didn't mean it." Her teacher later described the child as pale and disoriented, unable to speak clearly for the rest of the day. Catherine Howard's ghost is not subtle. It is not quiet. It is pain frozen in time, a scream that never ends, a final plea that echoes through a place too proud to forget. Her spirit, if it remains, does not haunt for vengeance. It haunts because it was never heard. Melissa Carter had always loved history. A teacher from Texas visiting London for the first time, she planned her trip around the great palaces of England. Hampton Court was at the top of her list. She arrived on a damp spring morning in 2022, her camera in hand and her itinerary marked. She expected grandeur, maybe a few cold drafts, and plenty of Tudor trivia. What she did not expect was the encounter that would follow her home. It happened in the eastern courtyard, just beneath the upper balcony of the king's apartments. The day had grown overcast. Rain spotted the cobblestones. Melissa stood alone, waiting for her guided tour to resume, and decided to take a photograph. She turned toward the towering wall and took a quick selfie, her reflection caught faintly in the window behind her. She thought nothing of it until hours later, back at her hotel. Scrolling through her phone, she stopped on the balcony shot. Just over her right shoulder, in the background, stood a man. Tall, robed in dark garments, his face blurred but unmistakably human. His posture was rigid, his head slightly tilted, as if watching her, but no one had been there. The courtyard was empty. She had checked. That night, Melissa woke suddenly from a dream she could not fully remember. She had been kneeling, her hands were tied. A roaring crowd surrounded her, but she could not speak. Her throat burned, and the world tipped sideways into black. The following morning, she found herself unable to talk. Her voice was intact, physically, but no sound came out. Doctors said it was stress. She wasn't so sure. The silence lasted for 6 hours. When she shared the photo online, others commented on the figure. Paranormal researchers reached out. One mentioned the similarity between the image and reported sightings of Charles I. Melissa had never heard of his ghost before. Now, she avoids mirrors, avoids looking too long at reflections. It wasn't just a haunting, she later said. It was like someone chose me, like they needed me to feel what they felt, just for a moment. To those who have lived near Hampton Court Palace their whole lives, the stories are not just ghost tales. They are inherited truths, passed down like old hymns or warnings. Locals speak of the palace as a thin place, a term rooted in ancient belief, a location where the veil between the living and the dead is fragile, worn thin by centuries of emotion, ceremony, and death. One theory, whispered among spiritual historians, suggests the palace's foundations sit atop a Roman burial route that once traced the Thames. The line, they say, was never meant to be disturbed. When construction began in the 1500s, something beneath was sealed in, not driven away. Others look to the architecture itself. The symmetry of Hampton Court, its long corridors aligned in sacred geometric patterns, may have accidentally replicated ceremonial pathways. Energy, some believe, loops within these designs, unable to escape. It collects in corners, runs down galleries like trapped wind, and grows heavier with each generation that enters unaware. Psychics brought into the palace during private investigations often speak of the same presence, not malicious, but bound. One described the experience as entering a library of sorrow where the books scream when you open them. Another claimed that royal bloodlines carry a spiritual weight, and when kings or queens die unjustly or without peace, their spirits remain, performing duty even after death. They are not watching because they want to. They are watching because they must. Because for some, the crown is not a symbol of power. It is a chain that follows them into eternity. He is known by the few who have seen him as the Pale Sentinel, a silent figure, always still, always watching. Those who recognize his face from old portraits know him as King Charles I, the only English monarch to be tried and executed by his own people. His downfall was public, his death gruesome, but his legacy, it seems, did not end with the blade. Charles I was once confined within Hampton Court Palace after his capture by Parliament. He had walked the stone corridors not as king, but as prisoner. Within weeks of his escape, he was recaptured, tried, and led to the scaffold. His head was severed on a cold January morning in 1649. Witnesses at the time described a crowd stunned into silence, as if the realm itself had been torn apart. In the centuries since, a figure has been seen on the eastern balcony of the king's apartments between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the same posture, upright, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the courtyard below. He does not move, he does not speak, but those who have seen him report an overwhelming sensation of being judged. In 2007, a palace caretaker locking up for the night spotted the figure while crossing the courtyard. At first, he assumed it was a reenactor or perhaps another staff member, but no one else was on duty. He looked up again, and the figure was gone. When he returned to the guard station, his radio emitted a burst of static, followed by a low, hollow groan that faded into silence. Paranormal investigators once stationed a thermal camera on that balcony for a week. On the 4th night, it recorded a sudden humanoid heat signature, one that lasted only 13 seconds before vanishing entirely. Moments later, nearby equipment failed. No power loss, no technical explanation. The feeling Charles I's ghost evokes is not fear, but grief, heavy, suffocating sorrow. The grief of a man unmade by his own people, unable to walk away from his legacy. He stands not in rage, but in remembrance. A fallen monarch still guarding what little he has left. In the spring of 2023, a private media company was granted overnight access to Hampton Court Palace to film a documentary on historical architecture. The crew brought high-end drones, thermal cameras, and multiple stabilized handhelds. What they captured was not what they came for. Just before 2:30 a.m., as the drone passed above the main courtyard, its operator noticed something unusual on the live feed. A dark figure stood alone on the eastern balcony of the king's apartments. The image was clear for 3 seconds, then the figure vanished mid-frame. Reviewing the footage in real time, the crew watched it over and over. There had been no one scheduled in that wing. All entrances were locked. Thinking it was perhaps a glitch, they returned to the same balcony with thermal imaging. That area had been cold all night, normal for spring. But at precisely 2:46 a.m., the camera registered a concentrated heat signature matching the outline of a man standing completely still. The thermal image pulsed once, then dissipated. Seconds later, the camera died. Its battery, fully charged before deployment, had drained to 0. 2 team members attempted to continue filming, but the atmosphere shifted. One reported a crushing pressure in his ears and chest, as if the air had thickened. Another began to shake uncontrollably and left the building, refusing to re-enter. The lead producer called the shoot off for the night. Back at their studio, they reviewed the footage frame by frame. The drone's video showed not only the figure's silhouette, but also a faint movement of its head turning, slowly, toward the camera just before vanishing. No facial features, just motion. Just recognition. The event made headlines in niche paranormal circles, cited as one of the clearest visual anomalies ever recorded on royal grounds. Experts confirmed no tampering, no interference. The footage remains unexplained. Even in silence, even through a lens, the figure seemed to speak, "I am still here." By day, Hampton Court Palace remains one of England's most visited historical sites. Families walk through the long halls with audio guides in hand, pausing beneath painted ceilings and ancient tapestries. School groups file into the Tudor kitchens. Cameras click beneath the sunlight that warms the courtyards. But those who work behind the scenes know that the palace shifts when the crowds leave. and some parts of it are never quite the same again. The Queen's Gallery, home to the echoes of Catherine Howard's final scream, is no longer included on certain evening tours. Some staff request alternate patrol routes to avoid it. One guide admitted she carries a small cross in her pocket, not out of religious devotion, but habit. "There are places here that feel like they're waiting for something," she said quietly, "and I'd rather not be the one they choose." In certain rooms, electronics fail without warning. Camera batteries that function perfectly in open air die minutes after crossing a particular threshold. Tourists have reported phones freezing, footage vanishing, or strange static interfering with recordings. Engineers and staff technicians have tried to explain it: humidity, structural interference, but no answer satisfies every case. Recent renovations have stirred more than dust. In 2021, while restoring floorboards beneath a forgotten stairwell, workers uncovered fragments of bone. Not animal, according to the site's archaeologist. Human. Their origin remains undetermined. The corridor where they were found was sealed again shortly after. New exhibitions often trigger increased reports of unusual activity. Objects are found moved. Displays must be reset. At times, windows slam despite no wind. At others, doors open in rooms that were locked just minutes before. One room, once used as a royal nursery, remains locked altogether. The reason? A consistent report from cleaning staff that music plays from within, even when the room is completely empty. The palace continues to function as it always has, formally, proudly, publicly. But the truth whispered in its deeper corners is this: Hampton Court is not simply a monument, it is a memory in motion. And some memories do not like to be disturbed. There are places in this world where time refuses to move forward, where history does not settle quietly into the past. Hampton Court Palace is one of those places. Beneath the gleaming surfaces and restored walls lies something deeper, a residue of pain, of decisions that ended lives, of power that came at too great a cost. The ghosts that linger here are not legends born from superstition. They are echoes of truth. A young queen whose final cries still shake the gallery walls. A king brought low by his own subjects, now watching the grounds he once ruled. A courtier whose betrayal left her lost in the dark. These spirits do not seek vengeance. They do not chase, they remain. Present, unwilling or unable to move on. Perhaps they stay out of duty. Perhaps they were never given peace. Or perhaps some places remember too much. They remember screams, footsteps, grief, and the air itself holds on to what was never spoken. When visitors walk these halls, they are not alone. Every glance over the shoulder, every unexplained sound, every cold shiver is a reminder that this palace is not empty after hours. It breathes with memory, and it watches back. As you finish this story, ask yourself, if walls could speak, what would they say? And more importantly, would you want to hear it? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the past. If you have experienced something at Hampton Court or any other place where the past feels too close, share your story below. Subscribe for more true accounts of history that refuses to stay buried. And remember, in some places, the crown never sleeps.